Champions Cup quarterfinals, the final three quarterfinals. One of them's already been played between Northampton and Bath. Teams are out. Who are the favourites? Which one is predicted to be the closest? We'll go through them pretty quick. The lineups and whatnot. You guys can let us know your thoughts. Two of the three are predicted to be close-ish. One of them is predicted to be a blowout. Which one do you think that is? Glasgow up against Toulon. That one's kind of your middle of the range game in terms of how close it is going to be, because Glasgow are decent favourites, depending on which site you go with. It's around about 10, between 8 and 10 points, depending on if you're going with the bookies or the Rugby Forecast algorithm. Glasgow are a very tough team to beat at home, but the Bulls gave them a good run for their money last week, and despite Toulon's up and down season in the top 14, they've still got a pretty stacked squad full of some good players. So if they can click, you never know what kind of performance they could put out there. Glasgow have kept things very, very stable. I think Gunter Beju was like the only change, or him and Afshar are the only changes to the starting 15. So Gunter Beju comes in from the bench at lock. Williamson drops to the bench. And then Afshar replaces Horn. It's not even a hard name to say. Why am I struggling with that? He replaces Horn at halfback. There's no Horn for this one. So everything else is pretty stable. Kyle Steyn still captains from the wing. Mackay is still there at fullback. Ollie Smith rounds out that nice attacking back three on the left wing. Tuipulotu and McDowell. All Scottish midfield. Schickerling, Hiddleston, Xander Ferguson front row. But the back row is maybe, like if you're looking for some stats, that's the area where Glasgow really get pretty sexy. Matt Ferguson, Rory Darge, and Jack Dempsey. Dempsey massive on the carry, and the other two fellas on last week's defensive shift were massive. Darge had 19 tackles, Ferguson had 17. These guys will be a key difference maker for Glasgow if they can get their game going. For Toulon, they've made a few changes as well. Jaminet comes in at fullback, and then Sinzel comes in at 12 for Frisch. Everything else, though, for them is pretty stable. There's no changes in the forward pack. Ribbon still captains the side from the second row. You've still got Jean-Baptiste Gros, Bobigny, and Sinclair, so it's an all-international front row. And then Olivon is probably the biggest name guy in the rest of the forward pack in the number 7 jersey. Ben White and Albanos still running the show at 9 and 10. Remember, White scored a try last week against the Stormers. Thomas Albanos set up a couple. Nacho Bricks is still there. So Dreon is maybe, again, if you're looking for some stats, he's your danger man out in that right wing. He had 3 line breaks last week in a game which didn't have that many line breaks. So yeah, he is a proper weapon. So both teams have got real danger men on their right wings. Stats-wise for the teams, like Glasgow, line-out last week was not very good. I think it was like 75%, so that will need to be better. But their tackle percentage, I already highlighted the back rowers, was 93%. They only missed 9 tackles last week. It is so rare for a team to be single digits on the missed tackle count. So Glasgow, a massive defensive effort. For Toulon, their defensive effort was good in a different way. They only conceded 3 line breaks, which is, again, pretty rare. You'll often see one player get 3 line breaks in a game, let alone a whole team. So to keep the Stormers to 3 line breaks with the attacking squad that they've got was a pretty great effort. They did concede a couple of yellow cards, though. You feel like if they're going to get a result up in Glasgow, they will need to keep 15 men on the field for the entirety of the game. They are underdogs, though. The bookies, like I said, 10 points, Glasgow favourites, and the Rugby Forecast algorithm 8. So predicted to be around about a try and a bit to the good for Glasgow in that one. Second game is Leinster against Sale, and that's your blowout. Sale are given pretty much no hope on this one, despite the fact that Leinster have got a few guys out. Doris and Porter, I think, are the biggest name guys to be missing from the squad. But Leinster's squad's still pretty stacked. They're maybe a little bit light in the props, because there's one name on the bench there that I don't recognise. But yeah, they're still going to be massive favourites. And it's another one of these damned if you do, damned if you don't games for Leinster. Because if they go out and put the predicted smashing on Sale, raised eyebrows will be at 0 because, oh well, it's only Sale and Sale aren't very good. But if they don't beat them by 20, 30, 40 points, then people will be saying, man, Leinster are just so terrible this season. So, yeah, you're kind of damned if you do, damned if you don't. If you're Leinster, Uzunov gets to start at loose head because there's no Porter. Sheehan is captain of the side because there's no Doris. And then Furlong is still there. McCarthy, James Ryan, all Irish international lock and duo. Baird, Van der Fleer, and Conan is the rejigged back row without Doris, but it's still pretty bloody good. I like Baird at 6 because he's that bit of tall timber. He shifts from lock this week. He's rangy. He's quick for a big man, and Van der Fleer was winning turnovers last week. Gibson Park and Harry Byrne. Harry Byrne's conversions, I forgot to mention in the last week's match review, that guy was kicking them so sweetly. Yeah, that's the 19 combo. Rico shifts to the left wing for this one. Rico is copping a lot of... He was all right last week. I know he's a bit of a divisive character. He's a bit of a Henry Pollock, out there character, but he was all right last week. He's on the wing this week. Jamie Osborne and Gary Ringrose in the mid. Tommy O'Brien was the star of the show last week. 4 line breaks. Guy was unplayable at times. And then Hugo Keenan there at fullback. The guy on the bench, who I don't know anything about, in the number 17 jumper, Jerry Cahir. He got to be an academy player. Sorry, I haven't looked him up yet, but it's been a pretty full-on morning watching the Northampton game and keeping an eye on these squads and whatnot. But yeah, that seems to be the only area where Leinster are looking a little bit light. Any insights into him or the rest of the squad, do let us know. Luke McGrath, I know he's got a big... Was it last week or this week that he's got a big milestone game coming up? Either way, I know he's leaving at the end of the season, so he'll be looking to go deep into this Champions Cup campaign. Sale, they've made a few changes. They seem to have a bit of a crisis, I guess, at hooker, because they got Ethan Kane and Alfie Longstaff as their 2 hookers. I'll admit to not knowing much about these guys. Luke Cowan-Dickey is out. McIntyre is the starting loose head this week. Apoka Fajua is the starting tight head. Maybe if he can have a good game, that's the one area they can potentially put the Leinster scrum under a bit of pressure. The rest of the front, or the forward pack, is pretty much unchanged. Van Ryan, Bumba, Vermeulen, Dugdale, and Dan de Prea. So that's pretty steady as she goes. 19 combo of Gus Warren, George Ford, still steady. Like, the back line is generally pretty steady, barring Rob Duprea coming in the 13 jumper. Everything else is, as I said, pretty stable, but there's some seemingly kind of less experienced guys on the bench for Sale. So, Sale are going to be up against it either way, but big scrum, tackle the house down. That's probably, hit them on a break, use George Ford's distribution skills to get guys like Tom Roebuck into the game. There'll be a slim chance, but who knows in sports. Leinster, if we're looking at some stats, they gave away a bunch of intercepts last week, so if they're going to be as generous as that with Sale, that might keep Sale in the game for a bit longer. Their line-out was also not exactly firing. It was at 83%, but they only conceded 3 penalties last week, which is nuts. Nobody only... you're trying to keep it within single digits, let alone less than 5. That's quite crazy. Sale, they controlled the possession of the territory last week against Quins. That'll be a tougher prospect against Leinster. But yeah, they were a bit poor on the kick receipt. Their numbers there were not very good. So they will need to be on song in most of the departments. They are predicted to get beaten by 23 points with the bookies and 24 points with the algorithm. If it goes past that, as I said, no one's going to bat an eyelid. If it's less than that, Leinster will be given a bit of grief. And then there's the Sunday game, which is the biggest one, I think, in terms of how close it's predicted to be. French powerhouses Bordeaux against Toulouse. Goodness me, there's some big-name squads in both these teams. And there's very few changes in both as well. I think Toulouse, for Bordeaux, the only change they've made is Bocheton at 6. Everything else is pretty steady. A bunch of French internationals. You got the 19 combo of Luku and Jalibert. They were immaculate last week, particularly Jalibert. I think he had almost as many passes as Luku, which is nuts for a 10. He was carrying for days. Bielbiere is there, Moefana, Pinot, so all these French internationals. Riassi, the Fijian international with Kiwi connections, is there at fullback. Poirot, the big South African Kalu Sadi. You got, Big Ben Tamiafuna to come off the bench. Yeah, There's a lot of talent in the Bordeaux squad, and they play such a sexy brand of rugby. They love chucking the ball around, which is very easy on the eye. For Toulouse, they've brought in Chocobares at 12. I think he is the only change to the starting 15 for them, so not a bad guy to bring in. The Argentinian international, Stu Aunu, Movaka, Altigeri, Flamand, Miafu. It's a big bunch of bodies in the type 5. Francois, of course, Jack Willis, Anthony Geelong. I mean, Willis won 3 turnovers last week in a game where Toulouse won a bunch, but he was their top man. Dupont and Intermac. Intermac against Jalibert is always going to be a fun little battle within itself. And the back line, I mean, Teddy Thomas, 13 defenders beaten last week is nuts as well. 13. The next best guy, I think, was Ramos with 5. Ramos had 13 carries last week. He was also busy. But I'm most excited, maybe this is sad for me just as a rugby fan, but I love it, the fact that Cyril Bailly's back on the bench. I haven't seen him play for a long time. I don't watch much top 14, so yeah, I know he's had injury woes for a long time now. People have told me he's not quite back to his old level, but Cyril Bailly, I look forward to seeing how he will go from the bench for Toulouse. Stats-wise, Bordeaux had 21 line breaks against Leicester. 21. That's more than most. That's more than usual. Usually it's not double digits. It's certainly not in the 20s. That is among the most I've ever seen. And like as I said, Jalibert, he had the most carries. He had almost as many passes as Luku. He is the kind of linchpin player for Bordeaux. For Toulouse, they controlled the possession. They controlled the territory against Bristol, but it'll be a different prospect against a bigger pack in Bordeaux. But they won 8 turnovers. As I mentioned, Willis was leading the way with 3. But it's not just Willis. They can get turnovers from all around the park. 1 point with the bookies. Bordeaux are favourites. 2 points with the Rugby Forecast algorithm. So home advantage, edging them in front. But really, that one's a flip of a coin. How is it going to go? You guys let us know your thoughts. It should be an interesting set of games. The kickoff times for me are pretty terrible. I got 2 a.m., 4:30 a.m., and 2 a.m. So in all likelihood, watching a bit delayed. But anyway, you guys let us know your thoughts on these Champions Cup quarterfinals. How do you think they're going to go? Support the channel, Patreon down in the description. Buy me a coffee down in the description. Subscribe, like, all the jazz. Appreciate you being here. Take care, enjoy the games, and I'll talk to you guys again soon. See you later.